we should do with this constant habitual reaction. And many times when we like to make a mistake, later on we sit and wonder, why did I do that? And we had a very good idea we should have done. So sometimes I wonder, where was that intelligence? If that happened at a particular time, we wouldn't have made that mistake. So what is the use of having that wisdom after that? If we can bring that wisdom to the moment we make that mistake, would we do it? This is where the beauty of mindfulness comes. So when we practice the mindfulness, it's not a trying to stop the process, we begin to see what condition is mind. Therefore, we don't necessarily own it. Okay? And we can, again, this is also something we can easily experiment with. Sometimes I ask my client that you keep on complaining. I have this thought, that thought, this feeling, and blah, blah. I said, can you tell me what your next thought going to be? What is your next feeling going to be? And of course we can't. We only know when the thoughts or feelings are already present. So if we have no idea, if we have no control over the arising of thoughts and feelings, why do you own it? This is one of the things I try to always get to my client to see. Because most of the psychological problems, you own those problems. No? The ownership is the problem. So if we can somehow rather disassociate that ownership, we get the better chance to see that problem much better. And to do that, as I said, I try to show that to this mindfulness practice, there's no I involved here. These thoughts and feelings and whatnot are conditioned processes. So therefore, we don't have to accept or reject them. We can really take them as a valuable information rather than owning them. Okay? This is, I think, one of the greatest benefits of practicing mindfulness, just not to separate those thoughts and feelings, or to reject them, but to be able to not own them, to look at them as a valuable, sometimes in very fact, valuable information. It's about time, how long not to do what to do? Until 3 more, final minute. So let us go back to the philosophy. So the mindfulness from the Buddhist practice, and I'm going to summarize what I'm talking, try to change the paradigm. If we're going to continue to further this research, try to look at the life in a far more constructively, rather than limiting it to a little bit of a audience. And then if you do that, and we'll be able to look at our own problems and whatnot much more compassionately. And this is one of the, as I said earlier, one of the beautiful things about mindfulness, once we disassociate the ownership, and we can sit a little bit so-called beside ourselves and look at what is happening. And then we realize it doesn't matter where we come from, whether we have a psychological problem or not, we are all suffering. A lot of aches and pain going on. And sometimes, as the Buddha said, one of the causes of human suffering is called the desire. And this desire is to do with not seeing things in the eye. In fact, I question this now. When I work with my people, I realize it's not the desire actually. Desire, what I call a secondary process. The primary process is fear. Fear we can see very clearly. Just imagine these senses from morning to night, again in the sleep, until you die, in a constant reactive mode. If we can't stop that process even a few minutes, how do you feel? nothing but tremendous fear. The fear of not being able to be without attachment to something. It's a frightening situation. And because we have no choice but run after external thing, we naturally look for something pleasant. But our primary cause is not looking for something pleasant. In fact, there is a word, tanha. The Sanskrit word comes from trishna. Trishna is a thirst. If you are thirsty, we are not busy looking for Coca-Cola. We are looking for something, anything to just to quench our thirst. That's our primary reason. But if we have a choice, of course, we would do something better. That's a very interesting case about Buddha's own life. When the Buddha was on his way to Parinibbana, he said that he felt thirsty. And he asked his assistant, Mama, to bring some water for him. And he went everywhere and looking for something. He couldn't find it. He came to Buddha and said, Sir, I can't see any water, so muddy water. And Buddha said, just go and do that muddy water. But that's what a thirst is. When you're thirsty, our first reason is to quench it. Not with what we will quench it. And this is exactly what happens. Senses, and that's what Buddha calls sanya, in constant reactive mode, looking for something called out. It doesn't matter what it is. Anything, it can't stop without attacking something. And that's the crime, it's a very fearsome thing. Just imagine that. If you can't just be without attachment, that helplessness, that desperation, that fear that is caused is terrible. This is really what the psychologists have found out as separation anxiety. The moment we are born, the moment we are separated, there's anxiety. So we then, well, the next thing we do, we try to solve these things. And the attachment is not come out. So the primary reason is this helplessness. And it is that helplessness that brings us to external world all the time. And Buddha found that, because if you want to stop these processes, we need to awaken another mode of cognition. And looking, talking about his own previous experience, Buddha said this one. He said, I left my home with a clear understanding, without any shadow of doubt, the sensory world or being in the world is not the way to happy. He said, yet, I keep on going back to it. Why? He said, I don't find anything else. Until I found something else, I have no choice but to go after the external world and hold on something. And this is the, until we awaken our mindfulness, Buddha said we can't stop that process. Until that we are always obsessed with the world, whether we work and deal with that world in a constructive way or destructive issue. The real issue is that not being able to be with ourselves. What we even talk about ourselves, how we look at it, it's a constructive image. Look at how we look at our own body. Do we see it as it is? No, the way we see it is a construct. And once you construct something, it's always subject to evaluation and judgment. And that's why perception can't do that. Perception always evaluates. So if you want to be free from this, you need to awaken this academical study, cognition, discussion in there, which help us to be, look at ourselves in the third person point. That will be very good. Will liberate us from this continuous obsession with this own. And here, that's the time is up. And yeah, thank you very much, okay, for
Thank you, Dr. Maloka. Our last speaker, Dr. Wallace, is an eminent meditation teacher, Buddhist scholar, and one of the most prolific writers on contemplative practices. He authored more than 300 books including contemplative science, where Buddhism and neuroscience converge, genuine happiness, meditation as the path to fulfillment. Dr. Wallace's topic today is Transforming an Unruling Mind, a Buddhist approach. He will highlight common obstacles faced in taming our unruling mind to achieve genuine happiness. Dr. Wallace, please.
Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here in this wonderful environment with such esteemed colleagues in Sangha here. So you're about to give me a half an hour of your time, and time is precious and non-renewable resource. So I shall also give you a half an hour of my time and try to make it meaningful. I very much appreciate the title of this conference, the mind being the window to our well-being. What do we mean by well-being? I'd like to do a tiny bit of classification. We have physical well-being, physical health, feeling good physically. This is important, we all value that. There's also mental well-being. That's not the same as physical well-being. So we can ask which of these has a higher priority. The issue of values came up earlier. Which of these do we value more greatly? Our physical well-being, good health, good looks, good vitality, good strength, or mental well-being? So we can easily determine this. If we take a thought experiment, you have two choices. One is you can be very good looking, you can be physically strong, resilient, in excellent health. And we'll add, you can also be the same person, you can be wealthy and very influential and also have great prestige, great status. There's your one choice. Oh, but by the way, you're also depressed, anxious, and very resentful. Or you can be not very wealthy, not very prestigious, not have a whole lot of power or influence, not particularly attractive, not in terribly good health, and maybe a bit old and pot-bellied. But you're cheerful, you're happy, you're serene, and your heart is filled with benevolence. So there's your choices. Which one would you like? And people always smile when I ask them, because it's such an obvious choice. Who in his right mind would want to look really good and be really healthy physically, but be depressed, anxious, and resentful? Who would choose that? You'd have to be crazy. And this is not just for spiritual people or religious people. This is for anyone with common sense. That there's something about mental well-being that is more intimate, more core. We value it more. It's closer to our very sense of who we are. So in our materialistic world, there's an enormous emphasis on physical well-being. Physical well-being. People are trying to eat well, they're exercising. We have gymnasiums everywhere for physical fitness. This is all a good thing. But where are the gymnasiums for the mind? Where are the gymnasiums? Where are the places where people are really cultivating exceptional mental well-being? Clearly, the mind is the window to both, and most explicitly to mental well-being. Now let's draw another distinction, which is often overlooked, but it's very old wisdom. Two different types of mental well-being. The Greeks called one hedonia, as in hedonic, as in hedonism. Not something really pejorative, but let's speak of this very briefly. Hedonia as a type of well-being that arises in response to something pleasant happening to us, some pleasant stimulation. You're aroused by way of the senses, perhaps aroused by some pleasant thought or some happy nostalgia, some pleasant memory, and in response to that stimulation, we experience a sense of pleasure, of happiness, of well-being. Hedonia, in short, is a response to something pleasant. It's a type of happiness we get from the world. And we can pursue hedonia by way of such things as wealth. You can purchase it. By having power, you can get a lot of hedonia from power. By having prestige, status, reputation, you can also find hedonia that way. Hedonia is what you get from the world. And many people nowadays equate the pursuit of the good life, pursuit of happiness, with the pursuit of hedonia. Hedonia is really all about consumption, about acquisition, about what we can get from the world. And this seems to be the guiding principles of the economies around the world today. If we can only produce more and more, let's keep that GDP keep on going up and up and up. Always, more is better. More acquisition, more consumption. The faster, the better. Let's keep that gross national product ever increasing. 7 billion people wanting to acquire more and more, consume more and more, as if the resources of our planet were infinite. Of course, they're not. And this looked like a very bad strategy. To equate the pursuit of the good life, happiness, with hedonia. It invariably gives rise to competition. Because there's only so much out there. And competition, when what's out there dwindles, tends to give rise to violence. And history tells us that is true for all of recorded history. Is there any other vision of well-being other than the happiness that comes from good fortune, from felicity, from acquisition, from consumption, from encountering pleasant situations, pleasant people, a pleasant job, a pleasant environment? Since most of my training over the last 45 years has been in Buddhism, I'll start there. There's laukika sukha, mundane happiness, mundane pleasure that comes from pleasant stimulation, from the senses, from material goods, from pleasant people, from being praised, from having good reputation, and so forth. But there's also sammasukha, or satsukha, authentic happiness, sublime happiness. So we start there, a distinction between the two. It's not that one is bad or the other one's good, but they are different. The Greeks use these two terms, hedonia, for this more sensory or stimulus-driven happiness, but they also spoke of this term that I would love to see become a common term globally, eudaimonia, which is often translated as genuine happiness or authentic happiness. So what is this? This is a sense of well-being, the same term, a sense of well-being that's not contingent upon pleasant things happening to us. It's not something we get from the world, but a quality of well-being that we bring to the world. We don't acquire it, we cultivate it. It comes from within and doesn't need pleasant stimulation to be around. The Buddha spoke of 3 levels of this type of sukha, of this type of genuine happiness. And one of these comes from simply from sila, from ethics, from leading a non-violent and benevolent way of life. And at the end of the day, if you look back on how you have engaged with the world, at the end of the day, you look back and say, I was really non-violent all day by way of my body, speech, and mind. I was truly non-violent. But not only that, I really brought benevolence, kindness, loving kindness, warmth and kindness, compassion to my interactions with other beings, other sentient beings around me. At the end of the day, there's some satisfaction. Isn't that? Some sense of well-being, a sense that this was a good day, this was a meaningful day. It's not describing what happened to you, it's describing what you brought to the world. And there's satisfaction in that. That's sukha. That's sammasukha. That is authentic. But we don't need to stop there. The Buddha spoke also of a deeper level, a more internal level of sukha that comes from the cultivation of heart and mind, from samadhi, from the cultivation of overall mental balance, cultivating the heart, cultivating the mind, developing exceptional levels of mental health and balance. Such that in solitude, when you're simply by yourself with no stimulation, no entertainment, no work, no distractions, you can sit quietly and be very content. That your closest companion, your mind, is actually a very friendly neighbor. You can be content in solitude, you can be content in social engagement with others. It's not something you get from the world, it's something you bring to the world. And then the Buddha spoke of the ultimate, the culminating level or dimension of this authentic well-being, and that is the well-being that comes from wisdom, comes from understanding, knowing what is the nature of reality, what's happening, and a sense of happiness that arises from understanding. So when we speak of the mind being the window to our well-being, it's certainly true. How to cultivate, how to tame this unruly mind? To my mind, the very first step is to actually wish to. If you don't wish to, if it's not a priority, if it's not an aspiration or an intention, if it's not an authentic right intention or authentic intention, one of the Eightfold Noble Path, if you don't have the intention, the aspiration, if you do not value the cultivation of your own mind, then you won't do it. If we're always looking outwards for our happiness, I need more money, I need a better job, I need more education, I need a better companion, I want a nicer house, a better car, and so forth, then there will be no motivation for cultivating eudaimonia, for cultivating this inner sense of well-being, because the attention is going elsewhere. And so the first of all is simply the balance between hedonia and eudaimonia, between mundane well-being or hedonic well-being and genuine happiness. Which do we value more? Which do we value more? Well, we'll value the eudaimonia if only if we have thought about it, considered it, directed our attention to it, see that this too is a reality. One of the great glories to my mind of this theme of eudaimonia is it cut across barriers. The Greeks had this theme very strongly emphasized. The Christians adopted it. Eudaimonia figured very strongly in Christian theology. You find it in Judaism, you find it in Islam, you find it in Buddhism, you find it in Taoism, you find it in Hinduism, you find it in religion, you find it in philosophy. And over the last 15 years or so, you also find it in psychology. It's now become a scientific discipline of scientists, psychologists in the field of positive psychology, asking how can we cultivate exceptional mental health, authentic happiness, what Martin Seligman, really the founder of positive psychology, calls authentic happiness, rather than simply more pleasant stimulation. So I'd like, in the remaining minutes here, not have 20 minutes or so, to speak of 4 types of intelligence. We commonly know intelligence, or often maybe even equate intelligence with the IQ. You have a certain number that is considered to be fairly static over the course of a lifetime. Well, it turns out that people with high IQ generally do experience greater hedonic well-being. They're more intelligent, they get a better job, they get better education. They generally do better and they're happier with their lives because things turned out pretty well for them, relatively speaking. For people with below average intelligence, it's harder. Probably didn't get the education, which means therefore didn't get the good job, therefore a lot of things go bad. But when it comes to values, I would suggest there is a type of intelligence for which I have to coin a term because I haven't found it anywhere else. This faculty of our own minds that we already have, there's one called conation. Conation. Not a very common term in the English vernacular, ordinary language, but psychologists know it. Conation is simply this faculty of desire and intention. We desire something, that's conative. We intend to do something. We value, we aspire. Our ideals have to do with conation. The adjective would be conative, so conative intelligence. I coined the term because I find it useful, that's all. But conative intelligence is being wise in the desires that we choose to follow. From moment to moment, from day to day, a myriad of desires are bound to arise. They're catalyzed by all types of things. People, situations, events, and so on. But not every desire is worth following. And some desires are more meaningful than others. Some desires will actually be much more promising, or likely to actually give us happiness. Some desires may actually take us in the opposite direction from happiness. It'd be better not to follow those. So when a myriad of desires arise, wholesome and unwholesome and neutral, how should we choose which desires to follow? Well, one of the earlier speakers highlighted, I think it was up at the very first talk, Professor John Wong, self-awareness. Self-awareness. How utterly crucial this is for our well-being. As desires arise and arise and arise, are we aware of the desires that come? Or do we simply follow every desire that comes to mind, which would be quite robotic, actually? If we're aware of the desires that come to mind, and we have cognitive intelligence, then we recognize this desire is worth following. This is meaningful. This will give rise to happiness for myself, for others. Another desire comes up, that would be better not to follow. That will be harmful, that will be destructive. That will lead to my own unhappiness and the unhappiness of others. And these desires here, well, whatever, no particular significance. There's this phrase in English, be careful what you wish for, you may get it. And so, to be aware of the desires that arise and to follow those that make sense. This is meaningful. This will be good. This will be truly helpful. This will give rise to greater happiness for myself and others. Within cognitive intelligence, I think it's important to recognize it's possible to have too much desire. It can be obsessive, fixated, it can be an addiction. But also, it's possible to have too little desire. If one is simply apathetic, no vision, no yearning for liberation, no yearning for virtue, no yearning to be of service to anyone else, that's clearly a deficit, a cognitive deficit, as there is cognitive hyperactivity by being obsessive, fixated, and so forth. And then having meaningful desires, that would be a symptom of, an indication of cognitive intelligence. In this world today, I can think of few things that are more important than placing a higher priority on genuine happiness than on the hedonic pleasure. Because we're now 7 billion people, and I come from a relatively affluent country, the United States. I'm from California. So we Americans, we consume a lot. We have for a long time now. We've consumed a lot. And there is an ideal of more consumption, more acquisition, more consumption, that this is the good life, the better life, the best life. The more you can consume, the better. Well, that's not working out too well. Anybody who's watching global warming, watching the decimation of wildlife, the extinction of species, the depletion of non-renewable resources, knows this ideal does not work. It is actually a strategy for our own self-destruction as a human species and as a civilization. Hedonia will kill us. I don't think it's an exaggeration. The single-minded pursuit of more consumption, more acquisition. Our planet is not large enough. It does not have enough resources. It is not sustainable. We desperately, as a species, need a larger and a deeper and more meaningful vision of the good life, of well-being, and it must embrace and highlight the fact that it is possible to be genuinely happy, fulfilled, have a meaningful and joyful life, even without much acquisition, without much consumption, having enough. This is not at all to deprecate hedonic well-being. I think of 5 things when I think of hedonic well-being. Having enough to eat. There's nothing trivial about that. Having clothing, having shelter, having medical